La retenue des hypothéqués, le podcast qui traite d'éducation financière et qui vous évitera de devenir un cancre financier. Aujourd'hui, nous recevons Paul Taylor, président de PHC, Professionnels Hypothécaires du Canada, et Max Stencer, représentant PHC pour le Québec et vice-président à la Banque Manuvie. Devons-nous nous inquiéter de l'accessibilité à la propriété pour la classe moyenne? Que fait PHC au niveau du lobbying gouvernemental pour aider les acheteurs et la classe moyenne? La réponse à ces questions, leur perspective sur le marché et beaucoup plus. Restez avec nous. Bonjour tout le monde et bienvenue à un autre épisode de la retenue des hypothéqués. Aujourd'hui, une journée très spéciale. On a des invités incroyables avec nous. Donc, je vais commencer par vous les présenter. Nous avons de Toronto, directement, qui a pris un vol pour venir nous voir aujourd'hui, le PDG de PHC, Professionnels Hypothécaires Canada, Monsieur Paul Taylor. Paul, how are you?
I'm well, thanks.
Amazing. Thank you. Merci, oui. Merci d'être là. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much indeed for having me.
Et nous avons Maxime Stencer. Donc, on s'est parlé, c'est Stencer, pas Spencer en Max. Donc, merci d'être là. Représentant, en fait, directeur élu de PHC pour le Québec. Merci d'être parmi nous aujourd'hui.
Merci de l'invitation.
Donc, juste pour vous dire, aujourd'hui, pour faciliter l'entrevue, on va faire une entrevue bilingue. Donc, on va parler à Paul en anglais et puis Maxime et moi, on va jaser en français. Donc très, très pertinent pour Montréal. Souvent, c'est du franglais, hein, tout le monde. Donc, ça va être un peu le goût de l'entrevue aujourd'hui et de la discussion. So, Paul, let's start with you. How are you? How was your flight? Any weird experience with the pandemic getting here, or was it pretty smooth?
Yeah, it was really easy actually. You just have to wear a mask everywhere you go. I didn't actually even get my vaccine passport checked at the airport, I'm realizing.
Probably not something you want to mention on the show.
Well, I have one, so I'm double vaccinated.
So you're good, yeah. They just didn't check you.
They just didn't ask that question. But I suppose I did have to do all that as part of the pre-registration, I'm guessing. I don't know. But it was really pain-free. They've actually started once again having the shorter lines for the Nexus card holders. So that's good. When they first shut everything down, everybody was in one line. And I was so used to being expedited, the idea of waiting in line for an hour just to check my bag. Like, I'm never traveling again. This is ridiculous. Fortunately, they've expedited me again.
And you got here safe and sound.
Very easy. Yeah.
And here on time with us this morning in our beautiful studio in Montreal.
It is beautiful. Yeah, it's really nice.
It's our classroom, and we're here to discuss things that normally are not discussed with the public, about mortgages, about debt, about finance. And you hold an interesting position as the we said in French PDG. In English, your title is CEO or President and CEO of MPC, which is Mortgage Professionals Canada. Yep. So tell us a bit, what is this organization for those who are listening or watching us? What is it about? And how did you become the president of MPC? Because I hear a little foreign taste when I hear you speak. Right. And we were talking before. I thought it was Australia. I was totally off the mark. So tell us a bit about you. How did you get here? How did you arrive in Canada to this beautiful country? And then how did you get you arrive to PHC, to the head of PHC? And what is PHC? A lot of questions.
Lots of questions.
There you go.
So I'll try and be brief. I've been president of Mortgage Professionals Canada for about 6 years. The association is very much an association. We represent mortgage brokers, mortgage lenders, and mortgage insurers in Canada. So everybody really that supports the businesses that provide mortgages to consumers through broker distribution. And if you're shopping for a mortgage, you basically got 2 or 3 options. You can go to a bank, you can go to the credit union or the case, or you can talk to a broker who will do all of the talking for you. They basically have relationships with a whole whack of lenders and they can take your details and figure out who has the best fitting product for your particular needs. And generally we like to say they have great rates, but any broker will tell you oftentimes the cheapest rate is not the right product. It's actually not the cheapest for you long term, because your lifestyle oftentimes might require you to move for family or job or any of those types of things. And the very low rate mortgages are often really quite punitive in the event that you do need to make any kind of change. They're not very flexible. So it's really important to get some of that counsel on the front end, and a broker is the best place to go for that.
This is music to my ears. Continue.
Right. So the association, probably like all associations, we have mandates to look after education for the community. We also have really good working relationships with the regulatory bodies across the country. In Quebec, the AMF are the body that issue licenses to brokers. By virtue of us having lenders and mortgage insurers as our members as well, we also have relationships at the federal level, regulatory bodies, with OSFI or BSIF in Quebec. Obviously, CMHC and Canada Guarantee, SAGEN, are also regulated by the financial conduct groups. So, and the Ministry of Finance, of course, controls fiscal policy at the national level. So we do a lot of work with government relations. And then at the community level, we do events. We have education classes. We put together material specifically to meet the regulatory requirements for practice. We really just support the community that is providing the service to consumers.
And so how did you get to be the head of this amazing organization, which obviously is extremely important for brokers, for consumers, for lenders across Canada, probably the most influential association in regards to mortgages in Canada. It's a big jump. It's quite an accomplishment. What is the story of Paul Taylor?
So the Mortgage Professionals Canada job is the first role I've had in the mortgage industry, but I've spent most of the rest of my career trying to support independent counsel service providers. So I spent about 11 years working for the Insurance Brokers Association of Ontario, and then I sold connectivity software that was quite specifically structured to assist insurance brokers, specifically service customers, with electronic communications to insurers to really expedite the process of things like new business submissions or policy change. Ultimately, of course, for the consumer's better experience working with those independents. While brokers do provide the best counsel because they have industry oversight and they really do get to see all of the products available for any consumer and can, for that reason, give great counsel, oftentimes, because they have so many relationships, the communications between all of those parties can be the real challenge. So I spent a little bit of time working on technology to try to create better efficiencies there. But I realized after spending 3 years in sales, if anyone's in a sales role, they'll know this. If you wake up in the morning and you're not thinking about top line, you're thinking about the wrong thing. It is very singularly focused. What I really like about working for the association is just the variety of the tasks that I have to think about every day. The regulatory representation, the government relations, the education quality, the events, the networking, the consumer outreach, the presentation of the community as a whole. Internally, operationally, we've got, like any other business, our own website and e-commerce things to look after. I'm a bit more of a generalist day to day. I just like the variety of tasks. So when the opportunity arose, when the previous PDG left the position, having spent so much time representing other independent advisors, I'll give that a crack. And,
so you're a guy that has to walk and chew a lot of gum.
I pat my head and rub my stomach as well.
There you go. So you're while walking and skipping at the same time, doing a moonwalk. Right. And so you're not originally from Canada. When did you arrive to Canada? You were from England, or a piece of England, somewhere around in that island.
I am. Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about your home, your previous home, because I guess Canada now is your official home.
It is. Canada has actually been my home for most of my life. I arrived here when I was 14. So I started in sort of grade 9 high school here when I got. But as a boy, I sort of grew up in Liverpool. I spent a little bit of time in Birmingham in the UK. But certainly formatively, Liverpool is sort of home. But I sort of grew up in and around Toronto. So I actually studied music at Humber College first. That was my first chosen career. I realized that, I had to take a vow of poverty to continue that. It was actually less appealing than it sounds.
We didn't know this. We would have asked him to bring his guitar, and you could have did a jam.
He's good.
I've heard him. Yeah.
Used to be good. I sort of have feet on my hands now. I taught privately for a number of years, but it really is hard to make a living if you're. I was teaching 5 nights a week plus Saturday matinee, and also doing the Friday, Saturday night gigs on, whether it be a jazz trio or a top 40 rock band. I got a job actually working in an insurance call center sales environment for the sake of just getting a regular steady income, and that really is where my more traditional career kind of began.
It's funny how life just takes us in a direction, and all of a sudden...
It's funny that you knew that was for a woman, actually.
but it just takes us in a direction, and all of a sudden you wake up one morning, you're like, this is cool, this is my life, and I didn't know how I got here, but it's perfect because, couldn't be any other way, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It really is. It's very different than I expected it to be. But, when I was a kid, there were only 2 things I was any good at in school. Music and computer programming. Now, you got to remember the time period now. This is 1989. Computers are really still pretty new. And I thought, I don't want to spend the rest of my life sitting on a desk in front of a computer, so I'm going to be a musician instead to do something different.
And ironically, you're in a detention
everybody's
today.
Job now requires them to sit at a computer all day long. It's like you couldn't escape it anyway.
You're back in the classroom, though.
Even playing guitar, you're mixing and doing stuff on a machine. You're forever hunched over a keyboard these days.
That's true. But how does it feel now to be back in the classroom? In detention, on top of that.
In detention, yeah.
Yeah, to talk about the things that, we shouldn't be talking about.
All good.
All good. So on that note, Max, welcome to the classroom. Welcome back.
Merci.
Est-ce que tu étais souvent en retenue quand tu étais jeune?
Qu'est-ce que tu en penses, toi?
Moi, je dirais non. Moi, je pense que tu étais un gars assez sage.
Moi, je suis un gars qui parlait beaucoup.
OK.
Je suis un gars qui parlait beaucoup, donc non, effectivement, j'ai passé pas mal de temps dans la classe de retenue.
Donc c'est bon. Donc tu étais là souvent, mais tu parlais beaucoup, mais ça t'a servi à ton rôle maintenant parce que ton rôle maintenant comme directeur élu pour l'association PHC te force un peu de parler beaucoup.
Oui, mais capable de parler et communiquer, je pense que c'est un atout là, dans le monde des affaires. C'était sûr que j'étais tannant pour mes profs, là, parce que c'était pas tout le temps le temps de parler, mais effectivement, j'ai développé l'habileté qui me sert aujourd'hui dans mon rôle professionnel puis mon rôle avec l'association.
Donc, au niveau de l'association, parle-moi un peu de ton rôle, comment tu t'es rendu là, parce que tu étais aussi dans le réseau bancaire depuis longtemps. Ton travail, en plus de faire beaucoup de travail pour PHC, tu travailles pour Manuvie. Ici, aujourd'hui, tu n'es pas là pour parler un peu de Manuvie, mais tu es quand même vice-président régional de Manuvie au niveau des ventes pour les prêts hypothécaires.
Ouais.
Et puis, tu es aussi représentant élu pour PHC. Donc, parle-moi un peu de ton parcours qui t'a emmené là aujourd'hui.
OK. Au niveau de PHC, ce qui est arrivé, c'est que ça fait environ 8 ans que je travaille avec les courtiers hypothécaires. Et c'est des mandats de 3 ans. Il y avait un poste qui se libérait parce que la personne devait quitter son mandat. Et on m'a approché d'être un des représentants pour le Québec. C'était très flatteur. Ça veut dire que les gens qui sont membres de PHC au Québec, donc des courtiers hypothécaires, me font confiance de les représenter au niveau national. Donc, j'ai sauté sur l'occasion. C'est vraiment un processus hyper professionnel. Tu dois lancer une campagne électorale, essentiellement. Avec un vidéo, puis ta plateforme de campagne comme un politicien. Quelque chose que je suis pas nécessairement habitué, mais je connais l'industrie, puis j'ai des bons contacts. J'ai été chanceux. Les gens ont voté pour moi, puis je suis là. J'entame ma 2e année comme directeur élu là, sur l'association.
Je pense pas que c'est de la chance, Max, pour dire honnêtement. T'as mis le travail, t'es connu, j'apprécie, tu dis la chance, mais on va se le dire, là, t'es un gars qui est empathique, qui connecte les gens.
Merci, c'est gentil.
Donc, parle-moi de PHC, ton rôle. Qu'est-ce que PHC fait pour les consommateurs et les courtiers hypothécaires au Québec? Là, je pense que les gens aimeraient savoir ça parce que c'est sûr que c'est rare qu'un consommateur, qu'un client qui nous écoute, les gens qui nous écoutent sur podcast, les gens qui nous regardent en vidéo aujourd'hui, se disent Professionnels Hypothécaires Canada, c'est juste pour les courtiers. Pourquoi ça me bénéficie? OK.
Fait au niveau du consommateur, dans le fond, on a une mission de faire connaître la profession auprès des consommateurs moyens. Autant pour les encourager d'engager les services d'un courtier hypothécaire, comme Paul mentionnait, mais aussi de faire connaître la profession pour des gens qui veulent peut-être devenir courtier hypothécaire. C'est une profession, je pense, que les jeunes ne connaissent pas. pense pas qu'il y a des enfants de 10 ans en ce moment qui se disent un jour, moi, je veux devenir courtier hypothécaire, mais on va travailler là-dessus.
C'était pas le cas pour moi, en tout cas.
Non,
je suis là, mais j'avais pas un rêve de faire des prêts hypothécaires, je te le dis. J'aime beaucoup ça aujourd'hui, mais effectivement, c'était plutôt un pompier ou un policier souvent. Hein.
Exact. Moi, c'est un joueur de baseball professionnel, mais, mais je pense qu'on est tous d'accord qu'on tombe là-dedans. Paul, il a raconté son histoire, il a comme un peu tombé là-dedans. Moi, c'est le cas pour moi aussi, et pour toi aussi, Ryan. Fait qu'au niveau du consommateur, c'est notre rôle. Au niveau des courtiers hypothécaires, mon rôle, c'est de représenter les courtiers et les intérêts des courtiers au niveau de la province et au niveau national. L'industrie au Québec en ce moment, je te dirais les 24 à 36 derniers mois, c'était très mouvementé. Il y a eu un changement de régulateur. Le régulateur, l'AMF, avec qui on travaille en ce moment, c'est pas encore tout à fait bien ficelé. On a une super belle collaboration avec eux. Ils sont à l'écoute de nos besoins, mais il y a encore des ajustements à faire. Donc, moi, ce que je fais, c'est que je suis à l'écoute des courtiers et je prends le message et les besoins des courtiers et j'amène ça aux différents intervenants. Que ce soit l'AMF, que ce soit des assureurs hypothécaires, que ce soit même au niveau de l'Association nationale.
C'est très clair. Puis, toi, tu as grandi à Montréal. Comment tu t'es rendu à ce point aujourd'hui? Mettons ton profil, ton parcours au niveau du système banquier. Tu as travaillé pour quelques banques. Pourquoi tu es rentré dans le système bancaire? Qu'est-ce qui t'a allumé au niveau de travailler pour des banques ou travailler au niveau des dettes, au niveau de la gestion des dettes, au niveau des finances? What lit you up? Qu'est-ce qui t'a allumé?
Pure accident. C'est un pur accident. Dans le fond, moi, j'ai grandi à Ottawa. Okay. J'ai grandi à Ottawa et à 21 ans, j'ai déménagé à Montréal pour aucune raison spécifique, juste pour une aventure de la vie, on va dire ça comme ça. Je finissais mon bac et pendant que je finissais mon bac, je devais travailler pour payer mon loyer, juste pour comme une job étudiante. Et je travaillais chez Desjardins comme caissier. Okay? Par contre, mon bac était en criminologie. Donc, aucunement lié à la finance.
Desjardins aurait peut-être besoin un peu de ça aujourd'hui là, avec les
je ne commenterai pas là-dessus.
Effectivement, tu vois. Des fois, je vais faire des petits commentaires que c'est un peu stressant, ça.
Je ne veux pas me retrouver en retenue au-delà de cette émission. Okay. Donc là, ce qui est arrivé, c'est que j'ai gradué en criminologie et j'ai dit à mon employeur à ce moment-là, je dois démissionner, je vais aller me trouver un emploi dans mon domaine. Puis on dit, attends une minute, on serait peut-être intéressé à te garder puis te former. Puis de fil en aiguille, j'ai monté une carrière chez Desjardins, j'ai monté les échelons, comme on dit. J'ai tombé en amour avec la finance, spécifiquement le domaine hypothécaire et spécifiquement encore avec le courtage hypothécaire.
C'est un beau parcours.
Écoute, encore une fois, c'est vrai qu'on fait... OK, je suis d'accord avec toi. On fait notre chance. OK? Mais j'ai quand même eu l'opportunité d'une façon chanceuse. J'ai saisi l'opportunité et j'ai travaillé pour être où je suis. Par contre, j'ai été quand même chanceux d'avoir eu cette opportunité-là.
Yeah, you have to take the opportunities that arise in front of you, effectively. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think everybody has opportunity. Right. It's just that, are you able to take that opportunity and seize it and then run with it?
Execute, exactly. Yeah. So, guys, we're here today to talk about some different subjects. Obviously, there's a lot of people that listen and are watching us that want to know a little bit about what's going on. We're living in a bizarre time. I guess maybe that sounds right to us, but I think probably every generation has said at one point or another, I'm living in a bizarre time. I guess this is our bizarre moment. But, right now, a recent article that came out in The Perspectives, which is our industry magazine, talked about a survey of Canadians and it mentioned that 84% of Canadians think that we are in an affordability crisis right now across Canada. So it's not just in Quebec. It's certainly we're certainly seeing it here. We're seeing it all across Canada. And I'd like to hear you guys comment on that. And let me just position that for you guys because so I see some contradictions here, right? So PHC and the mortgage broker industry and even the banking industry, we want people to have access to housing. Obviously, this is I think that Canada in general is probably the gold standard in terms of access to housing. At least that's how I feel. If you compare us to other countries, I think a large portion of Canadians can or do own their home, but we're seeing that this may not be as easy with the price increases that we've lived, and so this is probably why 84% of Canadians are freaking out about this right now. But you sort of have to juggle two sides to this. I mean, because if you're rendering houses accessible, you're essentially creating more demand. If you're creating more demand, you're essentially contributing to the problem in which you see the contradiction, right? And
Absolutely.
we live in a contradictory world. So I'd like to have your guys, both of your perspectives on that. So how do you at the same time lobby government in order to make sure that Canadians can access homes, but at the same time recognize that affordability is less and less attainable. The social mobility ladder is less and less attainable. How do we balance both those topics and find a happy medium where people can still access property, but at the same time, we allow them to have programs that allow them to access without pushing up demand too much. So what's your take on that? I guess Paul, we'll start with you.
So really good question. Lots to unpack. The really simple answer to that is we just need to build more homes. A lot of the policies that have been put in place by a number of governments, actually, probably since the financial crisis, have really constricted people's ability to borrow. And they've made it more difficult to purchase a home by doing things that you would consider to be very prudent, really, requiring larger down payments. We've reduced the maximum amortization length that first-time buyers can use. Well, what that does basically is make the payments larger, but you pay the house off in a shorter period of time. In the first few years, that actually means that you're building more equity more quickly in your home, and actually provides more security for those first-time buyers. That's the logic in that requirement. Most folks that are second or third-time purchasers, when they're making the leap from a sort of a smaller condominium into something that will accommodate their family, probably now it's a bigger chunk of money, and so they tend to want to take the 30-year amortization because it's the only way to manage the payments in early days. But that's not actually an option that's even available for first-timers. I don't want to spend a lot of time actually talking about the technicalities of qualification, but trust me when I tell you, there have been successive, repeated, what I would term demand-side measures implemented by governments to make it actually more difficult to qualify for a home. And the intent is that it makes the banks and the financial system more secure, because anybody that's taking on a debt can show that they are very well prepared to be able to manage that level of debt. The difficulty we have, especially in the last couple of years, unfortunately, and I'm actually a great example of this myself, is because of lockdown, people have become so much more critical of the space that they've been forced to spend all this additional time in now. It's made the desire for that next level home that much greater, I would say globally. This is a phenomenon that's happening everywhere. We're seeing a tremendous run-up in real estate prices because there's so much demand. People are not listing their homes because they don't want, in a pandemic, strangers coming through their house. So there's very few listings. There's an awful lot of would-be buyers. We actually don't even have immigration activity close to normal levels at the moment, but we're planning on that soon. In fact, we have targets of about 400 and change thousand new Canadians a year once travel restrictions lift, which is only going to have more people looking for places to live in the country. The mechanisms that permit first-time buyers some advantage, mortgage insurance, for example, are actually not even really available for the vast majority of homes in some of the really urban centers in Canada now, just because of price appreciation. And so we're seeing a tremendous shift actually from the number of mortgages that are issued with insurance and the number that are issued without insurance, really because of that price appreciation. You're not going to be able to solve the problem with policy. Like, we really just need more homes. We need more inventory. We need more options for would-be buyers, which in and of itself will reduce the competition because there are more things to choose from. And that will start to see a slow erosion of some of the very, very high prices that we have now. It's difficult to argue that we should find ways to put people into very expensive homes that don't have an awful lot of money. That's really where you create vulnerabilities within a financial system. But I think we do need to be cognizant of the structures that we have that would put first-time would-be owner-occupiers competing against someone that's buying their second or third investment property, because I don't think that that's the individual we should be promoting. Definitely the would-be owner-occupier that's trying to raise a family that we should be. And there are a couple of things that we could potentially consider there. But those are the discussions we tend to be having with policymakers these days. How do we make it a little less easy for an investor and a little more easy for a first-time buyer, given that we all concede we have such limited inventory at the moment.
Should foreign investment be banned outright? Because there's many countries that do that completely. I mean, if you're not a Canadian, well, if you're not a citizen or permanent resident, you just simply can't buy. Is that a solution? Because it does, foreign demand in certain centers across Canada has really pushed up in certain areas microeconomically the pricing. Is that a potential solution?
I don't know if there's enough data to actually validate the statement that you made there. I think there's an anecdotal expectation that foreign capital is what's driving prices up, but both CMHC and Canada Revenue Agency are actually given some money in the prior election to investigate that, and depending which study you believe, something like 2.4 or 4.8% of transactions had any foreign capital at all. Really depends how you define it, and it's really tough to track. That said, in the most recent election, there is actually a commitment to ban, or at least put a 2-year hiatus on foreign purchases of property, with a bit of a carve out for recreational. We do have a lot of neighbors to the south, and we also have a lot of Canadians who own property in the US. And with free trade agreements, you've got to be a little bit sensitive to the way that you structure those. So I think it's probably a populist move to eliminate that potential. I'm not sure that in and of itself is actually going to move the needle low on affordability overall. I don't think there's enough activity.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, you're right. That it is anecdotal. There's not many studies that show it, but even banning 2 or 4% of sales is still removing some sort of demand. I mean, it would have some impact, but would it be measurable enough to actually have a global impact? Unclear, right? Depending, like you said, depending on the study that you look at. Max, chime in.
Non, je suis d'accord avec Paul que c'est une question d'inventaire. Il y a un autre élément qui n'a pas été mentionné qu'il faudrait peut-être commencer à considérer, c'est que les gens sont de plus en plus à l'aise, tu le vois dans tes dossiers aussi, Ryan, à un âge plus avancé d'avoir une hypothèque. Si on recule 2 générations, même une génération, quand la maison était payée, les gens ils disaient finalement j'ai pas d'hypothèque. Là, on voit des gens qui ont plus d'hypothèque sur leur maison. La maison a pris de la valeur et au lieu de simplement rester dans cette maison-là, ils veulent s'acheter une plus grande maison ou peut-être une maison plus prestigieuse et ils sont ouverts à 50, 55, même 60 ans, se prendre une autre hypothèque. Ils se satisfont pas du capital qu'ils ont accumulé au cours des années, mais ils veulent parce que essentiellement, c'est juste un paiement. Donc, les gens qui ont 500 000 de mise de fonds accumulés sur 40 ans de home ownership, ils compétitionnent avec des premiers acheteurs qui ont peut-être 20 000 de mise de fonds. Fait que ça crée une demande supplémentaire. Donc, il y aurait peut-être quelque chose à considérer pour les gens qui ont déjà été propriétaires, à savoir, est-ce que ces gens-là ont accès au même programme de financement hypothécaire que les premiers acheteurs qui démarrent dans la vie?
There's an irony there, right? I mean, because our culture and our economic model has pushed that we push consumption, we push more and more. You have to consume more, you have to buy more, you have to buy bigger. Come on, guys, this is the driver of the economy. And on the other side, we're saying, well, stop doing that. Well, we have to do something about it because you're actually hurting the economy or hurting, future generations because of the fact that we pushed you to go in that direction, right? Kind of a contradictory. Like, how do we juggle those? Like, I see a lot of, and for consumers, I see a lot of contradictions and like, okay, we have this problem, but we also want this. A little bit like, when you hear people get interviewed, I don't want to pay less taxes, but I want to have more government spending. and hold on, man. The two things don't really connect. Although, yes, I want unicorns and rainbows, but there's the reality, and then there's actually there's fiction and there's reality. How do you sort of communicate that to people? How do you make them understand?
Je pense que c'est l'équilibre. Parce que l'endettement aide l'économie. Parce que ça veut dire que les gens dépensent. Mais le surendettement, ça crée un risque. Right? So where do you find that balance? Je vais donner un exemple. La popularité dans les émissions de rénovation. Okay? Ça fait en sorte que les gens ne tolèrent plus une vieille cuisine. Ils ne tolèrent plus une vieille salle de bain. Right? Fait que même s'ils n'ont pas l'argent pour rénover la cuisine, qui est aujourd'hui minimum 50 000 $ de rénovation, ils ont vu l'émission, ils veulent la nouvelle cuisine, ils vont s'endetter pour avoir la nouvelle cuisine.
Consommation, encore une fois, consommation.
Fait que je pense, Ryan, c'est trouver l'équilibre, c'est ça qui est touché.
Ouais, je pense qu'on parle souvent de ça, Paul.
I still think the problem can be solved only really with supply. Like everybody's prices are going up, whether you're buying or whether you're renting, because the underlying value of the property is going up. If we added more supply, even to the point where we were able to curb the appreciation of property today, that also would make rents stall a little bit because the two are very much correlated. Without adding supply, really, we're not helping anybody. The folks that are really quite rich are taking equity out of their already quite large property portfolios to leverage to purchase more. That excludes would-be purchasers and requires them to rent from the folks building portfolios. We are very much creating a bit of a feedback loop, the old sort of rich get richer kind of a structure, quite specifically because we're constraining the supply. And it's the appreciation because of the demand that's driving not only the price, but also the rent increases that we're seeing across the country.
Sort of a debt echo chamber, just bouncing off the walls and not
keeps going.
Yeah, exactly. So let me throw in another curveball, which is which is very pertinent. It's in the public forum right now. It's obviously a hot topic. We just had a conference, a global conference on it, and that's climate change. And they say, well, why are you going to talk about climate change with debt? Well, you're talking about supply, right? Mm-hmm. So in French, on dit l'étalement urbain, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure what l'étalement urbain is in English.
Urban sprawl.
Urban spread or sprawl.
Sprawl, yeah.
And so, we talk about supply, we talk about new starts. Let's go, let's build, let's do permits. And on the other side, saying, well, wait, we can't do that because it's spreading outward. We're destroying wetlands. We're destroying forests. So on top of the fact that we need to create supply, we need to create supply in a new way. We need to create supply in a way that, and then we get into we get into the climate discussion, right? In a way that perhaps would allow for some sort of balance on the climate side. I mean, here in Montreal, if you just look at the in the North Shore and the building further and further out, the infrastructure can't hold that many houses that far away from the city. We're seeing more and more people getting called back to work, not completely, but 1 or 2 days. And so you can even notice that on the road. You'll go one day to work, it's 30 minutes to get there, and the next day it's 2.5 hours. What happened? Well, that's the day that everybody decided to go into work. And it wouldn't be 2.5 hours pre-pandemic. It was an hour and a half. So we've added 1 entire hour, which means that the réseau or the infrastructure can't manage it. That's more cost in infrastructure, more taxes. We don't want taxes. Again, we're in this sort of feedback loop. So when you talk about supply, how do you balance more supply with the real problem that we cannot, as a country, as a world, continue to consume with the thinking that we have resources in perpetuity when we don't. We live in a finite world, yet we're in a model of infinite consumption. How do you balance those two things? No pressure.
So I think we just very simply need to develop a perpetual motion machine, and then we'll have unlimited energy, and then we won't have any problems anymore.
So science is the answer. Science is the answer.
I saw it a little bit tongue in cheek, but I actually do believe that's the case. I don't think urban sprawl is going to be as demonized in the future as it has been currently, quite specifically because everybody's been working remotely for the last 24 months at this point, and economies haven't tanked. There's definitely been segments of the economy that have been based upon communities getting together. Travel, tourism, restaurants, hospitality have been really quite decimated. But if we have urban sprawl, you're still going to end up with communities in small pockets that you didn't used to take the train all the way into the city to go to a pub. If you wanted to drink on a Wednesday night anyway, you would go to your local. And so I really do think that I'm not an expert on climate. I wish I knew a little bit more about exactly how we're consuming energy. Certainly the amount of power that a lot of the server farms that are consuming for the provision of things like Zoom and Google, Amazon, the big brands that we're resting on, it's not as eco-friendly as people might believe. I think we just don't see the consumption of power, so we don't think about it that much.
Or
I belong to Amazon's Prime, and they deliver things for free. So when I consider even just the energy and the recycling of the cardboard boxes that show up to my house now for small things, I've actually stopped using it. I find I'd rather just wait to go to the store and pick something up because I probably am less energy consumptive if I'm doing it that way. But I think we will end up with communities that are a little bit further afield, and we won't need to be commuting into the city nearly as much in future. I agree. If everybody's coming on a Tuesday, it's not very clever. We can definitely do a better job of logistics, but we're growing out of the situation that we found ourselves in. So I think it'll be a little bit iterative. I think businesses themselves will actually spend a little bit of time trying to right-size their process and their staffing. And there's no substitute for getting together in person. We could very easily have conducted this via Zoom, but it wouldn't have anything like the same feel.
human beings are human beings, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we're a social animal.
Absolutely.
But that doesn't mean that I necessarily have to meet the same 15 people every single day to work. I definitely can be in a remote community and have far less individual interaction with particular team members. I'm sure we'll get there if we actually do avoid the environmentally protected places, the green spaces that every province has got marked out. There's still enough land for us to build infrastructure for additional homes. We also just need to build our economy to allow that can happen without the need for a 3-hour commute 5 days a week.
Right. Max, what do you think? What about and obviously chime in on that. You see, I'm wearing a blue shirt. It says inconcevable. Is this a problem that's inconceivable? Can we not? Is there a solution there, or what? And also, I'd like you to obviously talk to what Paul said, but also mention, is a solution maybe for communities to think about building vertically and not horizontally? Because right now real estate is very horizontal. At least here, we're building out. People want, I didn't really mention that when you answered, but people want bigger lands, and so bigger lands require, it means you got to build bigger pockets of homes. Maybe micro homes is starting to get there, but again, people want bigger because consumption is pushing them to get bigger. That big kitchen, my wife tells me all the time, I'm sorry, honey, sorry about that. I need space in my kitchen. Do you? So, and I will be sleeping on the couch for the next week. But the point being, what do you think? What's your take on all that?
Oui, il y a encore du travail à faire, mais je vois certains développements à usage mixte. Tu sais, avant, là, c'était des banlieues. C'était maison cookie cutter, modèle ABC, ABC, ABC. Là, on va voir des maisons jumelées, ce qu'on appelle des executive townhomes en anglais, que ça a l'air d'une maison, mais vraiment, il y a comme 3-4 unités là-dedans en condo. Et dans le même complexe, tu vas même avoir un immeuble à condo à peut-être 10 étages. Fait que ça l'aide pour la densité, mais ça l'offre aussi la valeur ajoutée de l'espace pour ceux qui en veulent. On voit aussi des immeubles à condo avec du commercial au rez-de-chaussée, donc usage mixte. Donc on peut avoir des petits commerces. Comme Paul dit, tu n'es pas obligé de conduire 20 minutes pour aller prendre ta bière au pub. Peut-être que le pub est en bas. Fait que je trouve que ça, c'est quand même une bonne chose. Aussi, on voit des développements au niveau des matériaux éco-énergétiques, des programmes gouvernementaux. Je suis pas un expert du tout là-dedans, mais on voit les dossiers rentrer et les gens, les consommateurs, quand ils font des rénovations, ils veulent des matériaux éco-énergiques. Et le gouvernement encourage des choses comme ça. Puis quand on voit comment la technologie avance rapidement, on se dit, les fenêtres qui sont efficaces aujourd'hui, ils vont peut-être être désuets dans 10 ans, puis dans 10 ans, ils vont avoir encore un meilleur produit. Fait que moi, je suis un gars optimiste, OK? I have hope. J'aime ça regarder les avancements puis le côté positif des choses. C'est pas tout rose, ça je comprends, il faut en être conscient, mais c'est des conversations comme ça qui font en sorte qu'on va pousser la note pour avoir l'amélioration.
Donc, selon toi, c'est concevable qu'on va trouver une solution?
Moi, je trouve que c'est très concevable. Oh, et puis, c'est plus... on recule 25 ans, c'était tabou de parler du climate change, là. C'était tabou de parler de le réchauffement de la planète, là. C'est indéniable. Pas tout le monde est d'accord, mais la plupart des gens sont d'accord. Et notre génération, on est prêt à faire des gestes concrets. On regarde aussi les avancements au niveau des autos électriques, de plus en plus affordable, des bornes de plus en plus fréquentes. Moi, je pense que dans notre vie, on ne verra plus des autos à essence. Donc, un gros pas dans la bonne direction. Et ça vient contrer l'étalement urbain ou l'impact environnemental de l'étalement urbain. Si on ne consomme pas d'essence, on ne brûle pas d'essence pour aller au travail, ça va aider la chose, là. Donc, je suis un optimiste, mais il y a encore du travail à faire, effectivement.
So as Max was saying, Paul, conceivable that we're going to, human beings have been around for, probably not, if you look at the entire scope of the existence of the universe, a speck, but we've been pretty, what's the word I'm looking for?
Necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah,
we'll figure it out because there's a problem to figure out now.
Exactly.
Je suis un optimiste. Absolutely.
So I have two optimists with me this morning. That's good. So it's a conceivable solution. It's a conceivable problem that we'll find a solution for. So that's.
I think so. I actually even believe to your comments about everybody wants bigger and everybody wants the next largest house. I think that actually really does depend where you are. I actually don't think culturally now if you're a millennial in Toronto, the condominium is what you're striving for. A house is unaffordable. So people do still want, though, the security of ownership because if you're renting, unfortunately, what's happened in a lot of the urban cities is the investors and the individual condominium owners have taken the place of purpose-built rental for a number of years.
Yeah.
So that removes a lot of housing security if you're renting from somebody who on any given day could call and say, I need a family member to move in, so you've got 30 days to leave. In purpose-built rental, you didn't have that issue. And I think that is actually the largest driver of the desire to own in a lot of the urban areas. We have about 2/3 of Canada that are homeowners at the moment, about 1/3 that are renters. And the ownership rates have actually been slowly eroding for the last number of years, and that's got a lot to do with affordability. Mm-hmm. But in all of the surveys that we've run for consumers across the last decade, home ownership is still a thing that 80% of people would strive for, and it is the security of housing that I think drives number one. We generally also ask, when you buy a house, what weighting do you put on the home as a place to live versus the home as an investment for your future? And it has been static forever, it feels. Like 3/4 of the decision is the suitability of the home for me and my family. And 25% we consider the investment. But I don't even believe that when they're saying investment, it's not all about how much money am I going to make out of the house. I'm leveraged pretty heavily with a mortgage here. I need to make sure that I'm making an investment that's not going to lose money. I actually think that just the security of ownership is the biggest driver of it. And land where it's available, sure, that's the goal. Where it's not available, though, it's just the security of ownership that people want.
That's a good point. Max?
Écoute, je suis 100% d'accord avec lui. Il y a une certaine fierté aussi là, d'être propriétaire d'une maison. Fait que je trouve que c'est un élément motivateur. Puis au moins au Canada, comme tu as dit, Ryan, on est un exemple d'un pays dans le monde où c'est malgré les défis au niveau des accommodements pour les prix, au moins on est dans un pays où c'est possible.
Yeah. I'd like to talk about credibility, and this is a tough question. So this is going to be the portion of the discussion that probably hits a little harder. So, I mean, not necessarily MPC, but or PHC, but experts and professionals have been screaming. Let's call it screaming bloody murder. That prices are rising. The government's not doing enough, and it's been quite a while that we've been hearing this. I would say I started in the industry around 2005, and I for 15 years I've been hearing the same thing. It's going to get more expensive. It's not going to be affordable. It's not going to be affordable. It's not going to be affordable. And when we talk about elasticity in terms of Canadians that want to own homes, do you feel that PHC or MPC, depending on what language you're speaking, has a credibility issue on that point? Because we've been screaming that, but in the major markets, Vancouver and Toronto, if we look at those, we've been screaming that for a while, and over this policy comes out, guys, it's going to kill the market. Prices keep rising. People keep buying. People still access homes, maybe a bit less, but it's still occurring. It's still occurring even with all this government policy. So are we just screaming, and in reality, it's not really helping, or is there, or is there a point there? I mean, I think the question can be asked. I mean, the prices are rising, I'm not going to be able to buy anymore. Funny, you bought 2 properties in the last 10 years. You were screaming that 10 years ago, and that's not the case. And so there's that point to my question. And then there's the other point, which I talk to my clients a lot, and I do presentations about this, and I think it's an important topic. Is it okay not to own a home? I think that there's an obsession in Canada that's unlike any other place, that, you don't need to own your home. It's okay. But there's sort of this failure that follows you around if you don't own your home in Canada. And I've spoken about it a few times, like, you don't own your home? What's wrong with you? Really? I mean, I thought you were doing well. And so I'd like you to, comment on both those points, and,
Sure.
Good luck.
Yeah, thanks. So I love the first question. I'm really glad you asked that. It really does provide us an opportunity to bring a little bit of clarity, I think, to the discussion. I think the media reporting of our position has been that we are screaming bloody murder, that every decision the government made is going to collapse the market. That's not really the case. The government's tried to make it more difficult to purchase a home, really to make sure that financial institutions and solvency throughout Canada are very well maintained. Banking is a confidence game. Like, you'll know this. When when banks collapse, it's because people are nervous that the money isn't going to be there when they need it. And of course, that's when they need it. So you get a run that takes all the liquidity out. When people are confident that the money is going to continue to be available to them, they don't need it right away. Anyway, the financial system security is what most of the federal government's policies are focused on. We have to be really careful if we're playing with levers of the economy that we don't make a decision that is going to dramatically reduce house prices overnight. Because that also has disastrous economic impacts. If everybody thought that their net worth had plummeted by a third overnight, they immediately not lease that car, not buy that fridge, and all of the money that generally goes to keep the economy running stops, while all of that revenue is needed to keep you employed, and so then there are knock-on employment issues. So the government is walking a tightrope constantly between ensuring that we're not escalating prices dramatically, but we're also not creating a precipice of employment drop if we go too far in the other direction. Our concerns, I think, as MPC has been, we acknowledge the balance, and we actually don't envy you the challenge, but we need to think about which pockets of our communities we think we should be trying to champion with the policies we're creating. And they're a little bit like a sledgehammer. They're very blunt instruments. You make one change, it affects the country. It doesn't acknowledge really, and they can't, but they know that they can't, to be fair to them. They can't address individual real estate markets across the country because they're so varied.
Micro versus macro, right?
100%. So we would just ask them always to focus on, if we're making it more difficult to buy a home for the single family would-be owner-occupier, we should consider whether we're advantaging the investor purchaser and whether in 5 years that fabric of the real estate market is what we want it to be. So our discussions around the changes that government have brought in have actually been trying to focus more on, we need to support, for the economic well-being of the country longer term, the ability for people to buy their first home. Once they've got their foot on the first rung of the ladder, they'll figure the rest of it out. We shouldn't necessarily be championing investor purchases. They generally have more money. The banks actually prefer those clients because they're better capitalized, and it's actually a more secure portfolio, you could argue. Mortgage insurance kind of tempers that, but these are the considerations for the lenders. So ensuring the appropriate mix of risk of the would-be purchasers, the leverage that they have, while considering the real estate prices of the policies impact, and ensuring we favor the right community is what we try to say. The problem is that description took about 5 minutes. So to soundbite that for a media headline is really tough.
Absolutely.
And instead, media tends to report things like house prices are escalating like crazy. People are screaming because interest rates are going to go up. None of that's actually really true.
We live in a TikTok world or an Instagram, a Twitter world where everything's soundbite and we lack. That's a good point. And I'm happy that you went into detail, because I think the details, what's that saying? Is in the details. The devil is in the details, and I think that's a good point, because a lot of times that's not necessarily the picture that the public has of the work that PHC does, or the work that any experts do, right? Like, they'll see the title, and I think I read a stat at one point that, people read the title and only about 10% actually read the article, which is actually kind of scary. Max, what do you think? Qu'est-ce que tu penses?
Mais ce que je rajouterais à ce que Paul dit, c'est que la mission de PHC aussi, c'est de faire reconnaître au gouvernement les unintended consequences, ou les conséquences inattendues de certains de leurs gestes. Un exemple, c'est, nous, on croit que c'est le bénéfice de tout le monde que le consommateur ait plus de choix possibles dans ses choix hypothécaires. Il y a eu des règlements qui ont été mis en place qui empêchaient ou rendraient plus difficile un client de transférer son hypothèque d'une banque à une autre banque. Mais c'était pas le désir du gouvernement de faire ça, mais c'est une conséquence inattendue. Donc, notre rôle, lorsqu'on rencontre avec les politiciens, c'est de leur faire comprendre tous les éléments, et pas seulement les éléments en lien avec les prix des maisons ou le surendettement de la population.
C'est un bon point. Est-ce que les Canadiens devraient avoir plus de discussions autour de peut-être acheter une maison, c'est pas pour moi. Puis c'est correct parce que je vais avoir une excellente situation financière. Ça va bien aller. Je vais avoir plein de placements à ma retraite. Oui, je vais pas être propriétaire de ma maison, mais pour moi, pas acheter, va m'amener à une meilleure situation financière que d'acheter.
Ouais.
C'est dur d'avoir ces conversations-là. Comme courtier hypothécaire, certainement, parce que dans notre cas, on fait des hypothèques. Donc, clairement, I have a vested interest that you take a mortgage, right? Mais je pense que there's a way to find balance where if you're honest with people, you know, and you're honest with your customers that, hey, have you thought about not buying? And you know, they look at you saying, no, I didn't actually think of it. And that's okay. And you know, there's a lot of people, there's a very healthy market out there that will buy, and it's okay to have those conversations. I feel that mortgage brokers and even bankers don't necessarily, you know, take the time to, it's very transactional. Like, I'd like to hear you on that. Like, both of you actually, what do you think? Is it okay to have that conversation? And that could actually maybe temper a little bit of demand, because there are some people out there that probably shouldn't be buying. And that's okay. What's your take on that?
Moi, je trouve que l'important, c'est d'être bien conseillé. Tu sais, la maison constitue pour plusieurs personnes le plus grand actif. Okay? Donc, les gens qui n'ont pas nécessairement des bons conseils financiers, c'est très facile de dire, je vais acheter une maison, au courant des années, la maison va prendre la valeur, comme ça a toujours été. Je vais payer l'hypothèque et à la fin de l'amortissement, je vais avoir un actif. Par contre, à ton point, peut-être que ces gens-là pouvaient plutôt payer un loyer et investir l'argent dans des REER ou autres mécanismes de wealth accumulation et avoir une meilleure situation financière à la fin. Donc, je pense que c'est juste, par défaut, les consommateurs gravitent vers l'achat d'une propriété. Par contre, s'ils étaient bien conseillés, chaque situation est différente. Donc, c'est là où j'encouragerais les consommateurs à engager les services d'un courtier hypothécaire, à engager les services d'un planificateur financier qui peuvent regarder l'ensemble de la situation familiale et offrir des conseils.
Paul, what do you think? Is this even more true, that conversation today, considering that I think that as interest has hit a rock bottom and we can't really go much lower unless we start talking about negative rates, and then, you know, we're not, like, you know, we're not going to go in there today because we're going to get all policy wonked up. But, you know, considering that rates are probably the biggest driver of property value increases and that we've hit rock bottom, you know, we're going to see eventually, when this supply demand issue is resolved, climate aside, we're probably going to see a stagnation of values in many markets for a while. So considering that, and considering what we just talked about, you know, maybe it is a better conversation to actually think, well, if my property value isn't going to double in the next 10 years, like it has, let's say, for the past 3-4 decades, well, maybe the conversation of, okay, so I'm not going to get that upswing. I'm only going to get the reduction in capital. Is my capital better invested elsewhere in other mechanisms? And should I consider that? Should financial planners and mortgage brokers consider this new reality moving forward?
Yeah, I would say so. I think the low interest rate environment has definitely caused property to be a very appealing investment because it's driven those increases. I do think, though, our own consumer surveys will tell us, because most people purchasing a home aren't really thinking about it in terms of the investment return. I don't know, you're almost planting an idea about an investment in someone's mind to talk to them about, you should rent for a while and instead put your money in the market or something else to generate more yield. So your down payment might be healthier. You're still trying to time a market, though, if you're having that discussion. Prices will be flat for a couple of years. You might come back with a bit more capital. If that's the case, I still don't know what's going to happen with interest rates between now and then. Everything becomes a bit of an unknown. So I tend to stay away from trying to counsel people as to what is the right decision for them. Their own emotional well-being is actually generally at stake there. So figure out what makes the most sense. I do think...
Case per case.
Absolutely, case per case. I do like the comment, though. It's probably very important, given societally, so many families in Canada have basically built their wealth through home ownership, that multi-generational wisdom has been passed down that you should own your home. So even just the challenge question, should you own your own home? To people that are looking to buy is a really good sort of pause for thought.
Sometimes the question that actually leads to some discoveries or some breakthroughs.
Yeah.
You know, and you may decide that, yes, of course, yes, this is for me, yes, but ask yourself the question first. You know, don't assume that absolutely this is the answer.
What's the upside for you?
Ouais.
Yeah,
really. Like
pour certains, c'est inconcevable de ne pas avoir une maison.
Voilà. Max, j'aime ça. J'aime
nous,
ça, Max.
on croit que c'est peut-être concevable pour certains.
Effectivement.
Max gets 10 points for using the word.
I know, he dropped my shirt. That's good. That's good. Max is in the theme. You know, I gave him a 20 before we started, so now he knows what to
I'm
do.
paying attention.
But no, I think that's a very good point. So last question, because I know you guys are very busy. You have a flight to catch to fly back to the gold in the city, or la ville de la Reine, as we call Toronto. And so the last question is, in the last, I think it's 42% that I read that across Canada right now, brokers, mortgage brokers, that is individuals that are independent, that have access to multiple lenders to advise clients, versus, let's say, a banker or a mortgage specialist. We currently have a 42%, I think it's 2021 market share. That was the last survey or last information that we have. It's much lower in Quebec. So I guess my question is, why is it much lower in Quebec? And secondly, why do we only have 42% across Canada? And let me just do a little pitch here. Whoop, I don't want to hit my mic because that would be bad. Let me do a little pitch here. A client's in front of me. I say, hey, would you rather go to a lender and just have all their products? You have no idea what you can get elsewhere, or would you just like to meet an individual that's going to propose to you all the information and you can pick freely and have more education? I have trouble understanding why 58% of Canadians would say no to that, or would not be aware that that's available. So MPC is an association, but it's also a public awareness, has a public awareness role. So 42% is great. It's up, right? So we're on the upswing, and for brokers, the good news is that there's a lot more to grow. But I'm surprised that the levels are so low, and even more surprised that in Quebec, even lower. So I'd like to hear you guys on why is it like that, and what do you plan on doing both nationally and in Quebec to sort of give clients more education so they can make a better informed choice.
You want to go first on that?
I'll speak about Quebec, so you want to talk about Canada first, then I'll...
Sure. The question to me is, why do you not have as strong a broker representation in Quebec, though? And that's got a lot to do with just the licensing and the regulatory regime that was in effect in the province until about 2 years ago. Hopefully that's going to change direction.
There's 1,500 mortgage brokers in Quebec. There's a population of 7 million people. Mm-hmm. How many mortgage brokers in Ontario, Paul?
18,000, 19,000?
So the profession is grossly underrepresented.
That's unbelievable if you think about it.
Right.
18,000 or 19,000 in Ontario, and what is it, 10 million people in Ontario? 10, 12 million?
I might be exaggerating that slightly. It might be 17,000.
Still, more than 1,500.
Yeah, a lot more. We have at least 2.5 times per capita representation in Ontario
au Québec. Il n'y a tout simplement pas assez de courtiers hypothécaires, premièrement. Deuxièmement, au Québec, ce qui rend le landscape hypothécaire très spécial, c'est qu'on a 2 institutions financières qui s'accaparent presque 60% de part de marché. Okay? Je ne les nommerai pas parce qu'ils ont déjà assez de popularité, pas besoin de faire de publicité gratuite.
Je pense qu'une personne connaissant pourrait les deviner. C'est ça.
Donc, avec ces 2 institutions-là, moi, je pense pas qu'il y a un marché dans le monde où il y a 2 institutions qui ont autant à part de marché au niveau hypothécaire. Donc ça rend le travail d'un courtier hypothécaire un peu plus difficile de se démarquer de ces 2 grandes institutions-là qui s'accaparent le marché. Donc, c'est les 2 défis avec lesquels nous, on travaille. Ce qu'on fait, c'est on veut promouvoir la profession. On veut plus de courtiers hypothécaires. On crée des programmes d'éducation pour aider l'accessibilité à la profession. Et on travaille aussi avec les régulateurs, l'AMF, pour rendre la profession accessible et connue. Donc, il y a une croissance, il va continuer à avoir une croissance, c'est une belle profession, mais c'est ce qui explique un peu la situation au Québec.
Mm-hmm. Paul?
I should probably make a bit of a disclaimer, actually. Pour les audiences en français, je parle un petit peu de français, mais je n'ai pas pense assez vite à répondre à la question bien. So I really do appreciate you bearing with me as I'm answering in English through these questions today.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, as I said, the regulatory structure is the difference, but I do think we're on the appropriate upswing in the province too. which is really good news for Quebec consumers. The brokers really take all of the work out of the shopping and the research that's required. And it's really important to hear a broker tell you that you don't know what you don't know in these transactions. If you're talking to an individual bank rep or the case, they will describe their own products for mortgages, but they won't be able to give you a fair market comparison of what other lenders do with their products in circumstances of skip a payment, or you lose your job, or you have to move, and so you've got to sell midterm. A broker can walk you through a lot of those comparisons, and as I said at the beginning, the difference in flexibility of products oftentimes can save you thousands and thousands of dollars if an unexpected event occurs. So it's definitely in the consumer's best interest to get that third-party counsel. When you compare Canada to the rest of the world as well, there's always regulatory pressures or structures that create the environments for business. There was an act in the UK about 7 years ago now that actually requires mortgage consumers to get independent advice, which is why the broker footprint in the UK is like 90% of transactions.
Unbelievable.
Wow.
90%.
Wow.
It's much, much higher, but the regulation says the counsel is necessary, and so it's really encouraged that profession.
Right. Is it fear right now? Why doesn't the government of Canada not do that? And even clients that I speak to, a lot of times are like, well, I just went with my bank. I know a broker exists, but I didn't meet one because I just, I'm just not comfortable. And so there's a psyche there. Where does that come from? Where does that emerge from? I'm curious. I mean, I haven't seen any study that really deep dives in what is the psyche behind someone that is aware? Because obviously, if you're not aware of a broker, you don't know what you don't know. Gotcha. That's a question of marketing. That's a question of marketing. It's a question of reach. Fine. But for those who know, I mean, Ontario, you mentioned 15, 16, 17,000 people. So that's a lot of brokers. And still, we're talking about a 42%. So 58%, give or take, 50%, let's say, are potentially within that cohort. There's a lot of people that are choosing logically not to deal with someone that can give them multiple options and more education. And so it's sort of weird.
Well, so there are other considerations in even how those numbers are presented, though, to be fair. So I'll bet you that the number of folks that use a broker as a first-time purchaser is much higher. But then those people probably earlier in their sort of financial asset base lifespan, if you will, probably don't have the same relationships with a particular financial institution. 5 years from the time that they purchased their first home, they probably got a car loan and a line of credit for the family to grow. And when the renewal comes from their incumbent lender, oftentimes it's easy to just take that loan because they have the relationship on so many other product lines and suites that they're getting service for that they like one point of entry. Yeah. So the renewals probably very much skew the numbers that make the broker activity seem probably not as active as it might actually be. The
path of least resistance, a very human and costly default position. Very good point. Max?
And I think there's a misconception that if you change institutions for your mortgage, you need to change your banking. And that's just simply not true, right? You can keep your relationship with your bank, your paycheck's deposited in that bank account. It's perfectly fine. You take your mortgage with somebody else. And a lot of consumers don't know that brokers have access to lenders that consumers don't have direct access to. And we're talking AAA lenders with amazing rates, very flexible prepayment privileges, and lesser penalties than many of the big banks. But you don't know what you don't know. So, je trouve qu'il y a beaucoup de manque il y a une mauvaise perception, un manque de connaissance du travail que le courtier fait. C'est plus facile de simplement renouveler ou prendre l'hypothèque à sa banque. Mais le consommateur perd beaucoup d'avantages de ne pas considérer les conseils d'un courtier.
Des fois, être en retenue, c'est pas le fun, tu sais. Mais des fois, tu apprends des choses que tu sais pas en retenue.
Exact.
Je pense qu'aujourd'hui, c'est qu'est-ce qu'on a fait. I thank you, Paul, for coming to visit us. It was a pleasure having you.
Pleasure was all mine. Thank you.
Max, merci d'être là. Merci de nous représenter au Québec. Puis merci de continuer les deux à faire votre travail pour parler du domaine du courtage, parler de l'endettement. Peu importe le choix d'un client, je pense que le plus important, c'est que les clients soient informés, que les consommateurs soient informés. Et puis, merci d'être là. Ça m'a fait plaisir de vous recevoir aujourd'hui. Thank you for being here.
Merci de l'invitation.
Merci d'avoir été avec nous pour cette retenue. Je vous invite à nous suivre sur Facebook, Instagram, YouTube et les principales plateformes de podcasting, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast. Et si vous connaissez un cancre financier, dites-lui de s'abonner à ce podcast. On se rejoint à la prochaine retenue.